That work?
Hello, welcome to the Bleeding Cool's podcast slash Google Hangout book club. We have our guest this week is Jim Zub, writer of Skullkickers and Wayward, Samurai Jack, and Figment. And this week we're going to be reading Cy Spurrier's Six Gun Gorilla, which was actually my pick for the week. It's a book I read when it was coming out issue by issue, and it's since been collected. And I'm the only one that I know who read it, and I really wanted to have conversations with people about it, because it's one of those books that you kind of have to talk about when you finish reading it. So I brought it to the group, and I suggested it to Jim, who very kindly agreed to read it and come on with us. So before we get started, let's Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you've got a whole bunch of books coming out, like I said before, but I'm curious, how did you end up in the comics business?
Good question. So I've been, I guess, doing comics professionally for about, well, most people would have seen me for the first time in 2010 with SKULLKICKERS at Image. Mm-hmm. But my first comics that I was doing, I did a web comic back in 2001. I mean, like everyone else pretty much in comics, I grew up on comic books, started reading with, I think my first comic was probably G.I. Joe. The end of the old TV show and the cartoon, they would say, like, buy the Marvel comic, and then they would have the cover to the latest issue, and I would be like, yes, master, and I would go out and buy the latest comic. And then from there, that sort of got me, through into Marvel stuff and the Marvel Universe. My brother and I were obsessed with superhero comics. And then just slowly moving through all kinds of different stuff. By the time I hit high school, I was reading more, like, mature stuff or Sandman and things like that, eventually manga, and just sort of moving through all the different kind of wheels of comic bookitude, web comics and everything else. But I never actually thought that I would create comics. Like, that wasn't originally the plan. My background's in animation. I went to school for art and animation and started working in that business, and found that although I enjoyed it, there's very little kind of creative control. It's very, the bigger the production, the more people are involved, the less individuality you've got there. And so while I was doing animation stuff, I started to kind of get the itch to want to do my own stories. And one of the things that's great about comics is you don't need very many people to tell stories. And I kind of fell back in love with the comic medium through kind of creating my own stories and developing and designing my own story stuff. And so that was kind of 2001 to 2003, and the webcomic stuff was really moving at that point. And then when I sort of finished up some of the animation work I was doing and I came back to Toronto, I got what was supposed to be a summer job at the Udon studio. It turned into like almost 9 years of working at the Udon studio. Pretty good summer job. Learned a ton about comic publishing and the business of creative art and illustration and project management and just everything. Just like an incredible education in sort of how the creative arts work. And then used a lot of that knowledge to eventually launch my own book, SKULLKICKERS, at Image in 2010. And that was sort of the first thing. I did some writing before that, but that was the one that kind of put me on the map for a lot of people visually. And that turned into other offers for writing. And in the 4 years since SKULLKICKERS launched, I've written for almost all the big players. So I've done work for DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, IDW, Dynamite, just about everybody as far as a lot of the big players of the industry go. And it's been a really wonderful experience. And collaborating with other artists and telling stories is the best. I absolutely love it. And so I'm having a ball with it, and really excited about the stuff that's going on this year, and the stuff that's coming in the near future as well. So right now I've got, it sounds crazy, but I'm writing 6 different comics right now. So I've got SKULLKICKERS and Wayward at Image. I've got Samurai Jack and Dungeons and Dragons at IDW. And I'm doing a couple Marvel projects that haven't been announced yet. So busy.
Awesome.
And,
So yeah, Wayward's your newest one, right?
yeah, Wayward just launched last month.
Yeah.
The second issue came out today, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about Wayward, because it seems to have gotten like a great reaction. I read the first issue and did that interview at Bleeding Cool with you. And just tell the listeners a little bit about the book.
Sure. Wayward, I mean, if you want to do the short version of it, the simplest way to explain it is it's a bit like Buffy in Japan. So teenagers beating the shit out of Japanese mythological monsters on the streets of modern Tokyo. So it's above and beyond kind of the Buffy comparisons. It's really a story about mythology's place in the modern world and, the sort of merging of cultures that is happening now and the way it affects kind of how we think about tradition or how we think about, the stories of old in a world that's more connected and kind of more globally mixed together than ever. So that's really at the heart of what I'm doing, although, that's beneath sort of the surface of beating the living crap out of cool, creepy yokai Japanese monsters and ghosts and funky spirit stories from Japan.
Nice. Yeah, it's really exciting. I like the
Thanks,
first
man.
issue. I haven't gotten a chance to pick up the second one yet. I haven't gone to my shop yet. So.
Do you have a background in I guess the question is what kind of animation is your background in? Where did you start off in that bit and is
I was taught classical style animation, so the hand drawn stuff.
Okay.
The industry was really shifting over to computers just as I was sort of going through school, and so it was this weird watershed change where we came out of school and we were like, okay, we're ready to go, and then the whole industry sort of changed around us, which was kind of freaky. So I worked on several like Canadian cartoons that you wouldn't recognize or care about, and I worked on some development stuff for shows that didn't get off the ground, and then it wasn't really until I got to Udon that I started working on commercial stuff that you'd have any hope of probably recognizing or having any love for. So it was a really good. I mean, animation. The great thing about animation is you learn visual storytelling. You learn how to draw fast and how to stage stories. A lot of comic book artists can come from an animation background. So everyone from like Jeff Smith has obviously got an animation background, but some unexpected people like Jorge Molina, the Marvel artist. He was actually a student from animation as well. All kinds of different people kind of bringing those sensibilities into comic book storytelling. And I wouldn't say that comics are exactly storyboards, but there's definitely some crossover there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I just wanted to ask, for a lot of your stuff, like for SKULLKICKERS and even for Wayward, do you do your own character designs, or do you work with your artists to help you with that? Or not even just your characters, but also the worlds that you build and the settings that you do?
A lot of the stuff, like on SKULLKICKERS, it was sort of Chris Stevens was the artist I was working with originally on that, and we designed those characters for a short story just for Pop Gun, which was Image's sort of new talent anthology they used to have years ago. It was edited by Joe Keating and a bunch of people. And so he did the majority of the art on that. But then when we went to do the ongoing series, I started working with an artist named Edwin Huang, and he was quite a young guy, and so we sort of went back and forth on the design stuff. The nice thing about having the animation background and the art background is that when I'm working with an artist and I'm collaborating with them, we're speaking the same language, or I'm not writing a story that cannot be drawn or writing panels that are, more like movie stuff. I'm really thinking about it in that visual storytelling manner. So I find it, or I'm thinking about, okay, here's the reference material they will need in order to make this work. So quite a few editors and artists have said that they've enjoyed working with me because, we're on the same page in that sense.
Yeah, that's actually the question I was going to ask you is, after having such a long time working in animation, how would you say that sort of has translated into your script writing, now that you're generally doing the writing duties more than the art duties?
Yeah, I really love collaborating with other artists, and I love the ability to tell, like I was saying, multiple stories at the same time in a way that I wouldn't if I was doing the drawing end of it. Mm-hmm. Working with someone like Andy Suriano, he was one of the designers on Samurai Jack. I mean, that's like a dream come true. Mm-hmm. We get to come up with new, cool Samurai Jack stories, and with both of us coming from animation, we can sort of really dig in and do fun, kooky stuff with it. Trying to bring those kind of visual sensibilities or visual storytelling sensibilities to my stories. So, especially on Samurai Jack, it's something where I've been able to say, okay, it's not so much about dialogue, it's about visual storytelling, and give Andy the room to breathe rather than sort of overwhelming the page with text or something like that. But even with Edwin as well, when we're doing Skull Kickers, a lot of our humor is very physical, very visual humor. And it sounds weird, but I'm describing those jokes on the page. I'm sure if you read a script, it would be the most unfunny thing because you're like, and here's why it'll be funny, because you have to like codify the humor in order for it to be visually to make sense to the artist. But over time you build up a relationship with an artist. I feel like when I was writing Figment for Felipe Andrade, the first couple issues there was a lot more kind of hand-holding back and forth. What do you want? What do I want? And by the time we got to the last issue, we just had this awesome synchronicity where everyone on the team kind of knew what we were going for, or what visually, we like, and we were playing to each other's strengths. And that's one of the coolest things about being able to do, to build up with an artist, or to understand that each art team's kind of got its own thing. And I find that I write differently for them because I want to play to their strengths. I want them to be super excited. Before Max and I started working on the Dungeons and Dragons book for IDW, it was just like this brainstorming of, okay, what kind of cool stuff do you want to draw? Like, what stuff gets you hyped? And then I will find ludicrous ways to inject that into the series, because that's, if your art team's into it, then everything's going to work better. There's no point in dragging them into something they don't want to do. No one's going to enjoy it. It's going to come through in the work,
Yeah. Are there any like sort of telltale signs of like a comics artist when you can tell that they have an animation background?
It's not like I couldn't pick it out perfectly every time, but there tends to be a more kinetic quality to the posing. Like I find a lot of comic book art, especially the hyper rendered or the over, and I don't want to say this because some of these guys are amazing artists. Like that sort of the post image, sort of hyper detailed, hyper hatching, crazy stuff. Those guys tend to come from illustrator backgrounds where it's all about the rendering and like we're going to draw every stubble on the face and every little tiny fracture in the drawing. Whereas I find the animation guys tend to be more kinetic. They tend to be more about motion, or they tend to be more about simplicity and staging. You know what I mean? Like Mike Mignola is not an animator, but his work has a lot of those qualities to it. So it's like it feels very analogous to an animation thing when I look at his work. All kinds of different artists like that. Obviously, I'm trying to think of some other guys that are jumping out at me off the top of my head here. Not to say that I don't like the rendering stuff. I really do. It all depends on what the work is as well. I think that picking an artist that is going to reinforce or emphasize the qualities that you want to have in the story is key. And you don't want those things to be out of sync with each other. So sometimes that detailed, intricate kind of work can really play strongly to the subject that you're going for. Now that I'm reading the new Sandman miniseries, that work is so ludicrously intricate and beautiful, and it really plays to Gaiman's strengths as an intricate storyteller and as the sort of symbolism that he's injecting into it. So, I think that every project you sort of got to look and figure out what it's going to be, rather than saying, okay, this is better than that. I'm sure there are obviously some artists you say, okay, that doesn't work for you. I try not to. Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. We spoke with, and this is kind of more about your creative process, but we spoke with Al Shakot, who does Zero and I believe Secret Avengers, a lot of really good stuff. And something I find really interesting when speaking with creative people is when they're writing. He was saying that he writes for people to enjoy, but more himself. He writes something that he'll enjoy because his thought process is, I don't want to write something that I think the viewers or the readers will enjoy, because what do I know that they really like? So I want to write something that I enjoy. I've also heard the opposite, that hey, these people are going out, and this was a author of a novel, but these people are going out and spending their money on this book. It's my duty, I feel like, to write something that they're going to want to read. they're going to enjoy, and not necessarily sacrifice artistic integrity, but I want to write something for them. So kind of curious your thought on that and what your approach to that is.
I don't think I'm firmly in one camp or another, but I'm probably closer to Alish than the other, because it's like I need to be excited about what I'm doing, you know what I mean? Especially for creator-owned. I mean, if you're going to be, let's be honest, the vast majority of creator-owned books don't make good money, and they don't have widespread success. So if you're going to invest that time and that emotion into the creative process, I feel like you've got to have definitely a big part of yourself. That being said, because my creator-owned work kind of came first and that fed a lot of the other projects I get offered, I've been lucky enough that the vast majority of those projects play into the kinds of storytelling that I love to do. Because I wrote Skullkickers and people said, oh, he loves sword and sorcery, and he loves action comedy, and he loves big visual bombastic books, that's what I tend to get offered. And, you know, Samurai Jack very much plays to my sensibilities. You know, Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons play to my sensibilities. And so I've been fortunate enough that I haven't really been in a position where I've been like, well, I'm just going to crap it out, you know, to what I think the audience wants. Like, I'm not saying crap it out. Like, that's not, I don't know. I can see where you could get yourself into a headspace, and I'm sure there are projects coming for me down the road where there will be more of a sort of commercial bent, and you've got to sort of go, okay, the editor is asking for this, and the fans seem to want this, and I will just carry it out. But you've got to put yourself into it. I mean, I've got to be invested in the work, and that doesn't mean that I will never change or that I'm not up for editorial influence, because I think that those things can be important. But I think that there's a reason why hopefully they've hired me to do this instead of someone else, and that's because they want me to do what I do, you know? Mm-hmm. And so at the end of the day, I would rather have a project that feels like a Jim Zub book, whatever that is, you know, than to just sort of generically try and photocopy what someone else is doing or what I think a readership wants. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And you know, your mileage may vary as far as that goes. But the good thing is that when someone comes up to my table and they say that they love Samurai Jack, you know, it's an easy hop for me to say, hey, have you tried Skullkickers? Mm-hmm. You know, Wayward's sort of pushing a little bit because it's more serious and it's more it's got a little bit more teen angst. But as we're going along, I think we're finding a better balance with the humor and with some of the action. The first two issues in particular are quite dark. I think I was really worried, like, oh man, everyone thinks I'm just that goofy guy that does Samurai Jack and Skullkickers. I'll prove them wrong. And I really like overcompensated, like I'm gonna make this dark, crazy thing, and you know, stuff like that. And people are digging it, and a lot of the reviews are like, I wasn't expecting Jim to write this, which I guess means it was effective. But I feel like we're sort of coming back a little bit in the future issues to come. I'm like, okay, I don't need to, you know, scare everyone away with the angst or whatever, you know.
Is that something that's sort of like a conscious part of what you're doing with some of these new projects that you're working on? You know, sort of trying to like push yourself into new sort of, not genres, but new styles and new ways.
Yeah, I mean, you always want to push yourself. You know, I told myself I wasn't going to do any more sword and sorcery for a while, like after Pathfinder, and then within 2 months I was offered both Dungeons and Dragons and the Conan Red Sonja co-writing gig with Gale for Dark Horse. And you're like, what are the two biggest properties in fantasy? Dungeons and Dragons and Conan. Like, so then I just immediately went back on my own promise to myself. So I was like, well, I got to do those now. So, you know, because I really didn't want to typecast myself. But then I said, also, I want these opportunities, and they're both really amazing. Yeah. And 12-year-old me would kick my own ass if I didn't do them. So it was something where I think you are trying to push yourself. You're trying different things storytelling-wise. You're trying different things sort of character-wise, or you're sort of opening yourself up to the fact that, okay, you can tell a basic story from start to finish. You know, what have you never done before, or how have you never sort of approached it? And you will have your tendencies, and that's part and parcel of your sort of, I guess, creative, you know, just focus, the way that you think. But yeah, I'd like to think that my writing now is better and broader than it's ever been, and hopefully next year more so, and the year after that, at least until I hit my old man rut and then hate all those youngins coming up in the business as I stand on my lawn and shake my cane or whatever these guys do nowadays.
Yeah.
Turn into Alan Moore.
I never said that. I like you guys immediately pull out specific names.
My mind went there.
We're jaded
Look,
comic
Alan,
fans,
dude,
man.
we all know how.
Kindly and generic, and you guys just go for the throat. Just go.
We don't have a comic shop to worry about.
That's right. See, you guys, it's funny because you're all like, "Oh, we're going to be talking about the business," and I'm like, "Okay, I will generally not be slinging mud," and you're like, "Don't worry, we'll do it for you." Then the headline on Bleeding Cool is Jim takes a dump on Alan Moore.
Yeah, no, don't worry, we won't let Rich rename our
Video inside. Click to watch.
Yeah.
No, but in all seriousness, I have nothing but respect for Alan Moore. I mean, that guy's. I mean, he's fucking Alan Moore. Like, he may be a little bit of a curmudgeon these days, but that man changed the industry.
Well, and that's what I find really fascinating is that we're in this incredible period right now of creative growth. Like, the variety of books and the quality of books coming out right now is staggeringly good. And more people are reading comics and more people are engaged in the whole medium than ever before. You know, convention culture is exploding, and whether it's the movies and the media and the video games and the everything is sort of, comics feel like this incredibly vibrant creative place to tell stories, and you can still do it with a small creative team. And you know, even with the distribution channels, you can put it on the web, you can put it on, you know, digital platforms, you can get it published. You know, Diamond is this weird place where you can have people whose books sell 50 copies in the same catalog as Batman. It's like, imagine if, I don't know, every music catalog had your garage band alongside the biggest bands in the business. Like, it's an incredible time where it feels like sort of everything's up for grabs, and it's exciting. I really love it.
Yeah, it really is. How does it feel? I mean, because you're a part of this too, you know, especially with this new boom in image stuff. I mean,
yeah, the image stuff's particularly insane. Like, when I launched SKULLKICKERS, literally 4 years ago this month, you know, the numbers that we got for our initial orders, they were like, well, you're pretty much an unknown, and you still did okay. Like, you got some pretty good launch numbers, and we were all kind of celebratory. And like, Wayward launched 6 times as high, and I was just like, what?
Congrats.
How is that humanly possible? That's deranged, right? Like, the interest in news stories and in what Image is doing and brand it, and the creators and the momentum they've been able to build. I feel very fortunate to be a part of it. Like, the difference between, and not that 4 years ago was bad, it was totally awesome, but now it just feels like, I mean, you know, we are standing on the shoulders of The Walking Dead and Saga and Sex Criminals and all these, you know, amazing books that are coming out, and people want the next one. They want the next one, and they're rabid and they're excited, and retailers are excited in a way that I haven't seen in a long, long time. And people are coming through the door, or people are at conventions and they're open to discovering. And I think that's, you know, there will always be a group of people that they just want their superhero fix, or they just want the same thing they've always collected. But it feels like there's a bigger, broader audience that wants other stuff. And if you can be in the mix, you know, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess on that note, what stuff are you reading these days? Are there books that you're like really excited about?
Yeah, you know, it's weird. Like, it's been really amazing because I've been doing tons of conventions. So I'm doing about a dozen conventions a year. And you build up kind of a convention family. So it's like you see friends and fellow professionals, and so you want to support them, so you want to read their work. But I can't even keep up with, like, all my friends, let alone every other book I want to read. Like, that's kind of the cool thing. Like, I can't keep up with Charles Soule's output, you know, let alone Charles, dear friend of mine, and we both kind of, you know, he launched 27 very near to when I launched SKULLKICKERS, so it was like this. There was a group of us at Image, and Curtis Weeb and all these guys kind of getting their footing, you know, and then eventually Alish and all these other guys, and you're like, I want to read all of them. I want to be supportive, and you can't because you also have to get the fucking work done. So, you know, so I tend to read stuff in big swaths, like, you know, the digital equivalent of trades, or, you know, big So usually when I'm on a flight, I'm like hardlining comic storylines.
Mhm.
That's when I read Six Gun Gorilla, honestly, as I was on the plane and I just read the whole thing in one sitting when I was flying to Portland last weekend. But like, I'm trying to keep up with books, and so it's kind of this weird thing where every so often I'll have a moment where I go, holy crap, this book's amazing. And all my friends were like, yeah, we've been reading that for like a year, you moron. I'm like, I know, but dude, I have no time. And they're like, you work in comics. How come you don't read comics? I'm like, I do. I'm just kind of at the buffet table and then nothing, It's like the buffet table or the desert, right? So, for example, like some of the books I really like, I would name, and you're going to be like, well, of course that's good, Jim. What the fuck? So, like Lock and Key, I absolutely loved. I was really blown away by that, and Gabriel Rodriguez. And so I actually read the first issue of the Little Nemo, The Return to Slumberland book, because I'm just obsessed with Gabriel Rodriguez artwork now.
Yeah.
And I think that him and Shano are a killer team. I think that book's just freaking gorgeous. Love it. I like The Sixth Gun, that's Cullen and Brian, and they're good friends of mine, and they're doing great stuff with it. Wicked and the Divine is thoroughly enjoyable. And hey, it's teenagers in the supernatural, so it's like, sweet man, just like Wayward, let's do this thing.
Yeah.
I read the first issue of Witches. Is that out yet? Scott sent it to me. I don't know if that's out yet.
I'm not sure if it is.
I don't believe so, no.
It's not on the stands yet. No.
Okay, it's good. It's solid stuff, and it's creepy as all hell. So that's really, really solid. Birthright's not the guys doing Birthright sent me that, and so I read that, and that book's gorgeous. And it's like fantasy, but they've done it with a neat kind of genre twist that I think is going to grab people, so I'm pretty stoked about that.
That's the new Josh Williamson book?
Yeah. Josh's super nice, and he sent me the first 2 issues, and I just read it, and I was like, it's good when you're just flat out jealous, when you just read a thing and you're like, damn you.
I wish I had written this.
You got skills that kicking my ass here. So I'm pretty pleased about that. Sex Criminals is wonderful. I think that, and what's amazing about it is, I think Chip and I did a signing event like 2 weeks ago, and he was telling me how he really thought, like, the original pitch was literally Matt Fraction sending him an email that was, hey, what if time stopped when this guy ejaculates or when these people have sex?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the joke. And then he turned in this script that was this, like, really emotional character, piece.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden Chip was like, am I even the guy that can draw this? I thought we were doing dick jokes and crime, and they've both really grown, I think, because of it, because they pushed each other and they're making something really special, and clearly the sales and the accolades they're getting, prove it, because it's great stuff all the way around. I'm a longtime reader of Atomic Robo. I feel like Atomic Robo is the book that SKULLKICKERS aspires to be. It's got that perfect balance of action and comedy and super fun. I really love Atomic Robo.
Yeah.
And Brian Clevenger thinks I'm haunting him because I'm always like, I love your stuff. You're so good. What else? Charles is doing a bang-up job on Letter 44 for Oni.
Mm-hmm.
Death of Wolverine is way better than any big, huge, crazy event with the death of a major character has any right to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sharp stuff. I'm super impressed with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's all sorts of awesome stuff going on right now.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess that's a good segue into Six Gun Gorilla. Speaking of things that we've all read.
Yeah.
So I was the one who picked Six Gun Gorilla. Like I said, Spurrier is a writer that I've admired and appreciated for a long time. I've never met the man, but he's incredibly sharp, and his stories tend to be really intricate. He reminds me a little bit of sort of.
Oh, we lose Dave there?
No.
Back? Uh-oh.
It says his work reminds me of, and then there was silence.
Yeah. Very true.
That's how iconic it is.
Uh-oh.
Like a little
Hey,
bit.
Dave?
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to start that one over.
You're gonna have to start that one over.
Okay. Well, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Turn off BitTorrent.
Yeah. Turn off all that porn in the background. No. Yeah, he reminds me a little bit of Alan Moore in his like sort of storytelling sensibility. He leans towards like the very intricate, very meta, and the way he approaches dialogue too, just sort of with like thick character accents, also reminds me a little bit of that sort of storytelling style that Moore coined. And I don't really know a lot of people who read his stuff besides me, actually, and that's why I kind of wanted to bring it to the group to get people to sort of sound off on what they thought. He sort of he solidified his place on my sort of like favorite writers list when I read his X-Men Legacy run. I don't know if any of you guys read that, but it was like 24 issues from Marvel, and it was all about Legion, Xavier's son, who's the sort of multiple personality disorder mutant, who was in the past always used as more of a plot device than an actual character. And he sort of revamped and like delved really deeply into who he was as this kid who not only had sort of like severe father issues with Xavier, but also kind of like what it's like to deal with like a serious mental illness and like trying to sort of learn how to stand on your own 2 feet and not let some kind of issue like that sort of define who you are. And it was just an utterly moving and brilliant tale. And when I read that, I was like, oh my God, I need to read everything this guy's ever done. And so that
Uh-oh.
it was a little bit single issue than it was in the trade. It works much better, I think, as a trade book. But so yeah, that's why I chose it. I have lots of thoughts on it. I personally loved it. I have an immense sort of like for this book. So I guess I'll start off by just sort of asking you what your guys' first impression was of the book. And I guess, Joe, why don't you start off? You've been a little bit quiet, so why don't you tell us what you thought about Six Gun Gorilla?
Well, I've been getting more into westerns lately as far as comics go. I really enjoy the new Atomic Robo series that's coming out because it's a classic kind of a western series, and then East of West is that kind of post-apocalyptic western feel. There's a few other books that I really enjoy. But, so I was really excited to read this one because I kind of just wanted a pulpy, kind of plays up to genre types while also kind of bucking them. And I was thoroughly surprised by what I got. It was a book that I wasn't expecting to find out as a public domain character. And that this is something that has been around for a long time and no one knows who created it. That was pretty fascinating, and I was glad I watched Spurrier's hype video on YouTube about this series before reading it because it kind of laid the groundwork for what the story actually was about in the meta sense. And I thought it was an intriguing concept. It was a little hard to follow at times, but that's just because you're flipping through it. Because it's so entertaining to read, and some of the concepts, it doesn't hold your hand, so they kind of just gloss right over until you go back and understand it's not really something that needs to be explained. It's something that fits the story, which is what the story's all about. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a thoughtful look at just myths and why they exist and how much meaning that they can have for a person. So. I don't really want to go too into because I don't want to gloss over anyone's points that anyone else might make. But I'll just kind of wrap up my initial thoughts right here and say that it was a good read. And as far as entertaining, it was a pulpy read. That entertaining read I thought I was going to get. But it's also something so much more, and I didn't expect that going into it. So it was a good book. I was very surprised.
And what about you, Jim? What were your thoughts?
Sorry, you were asking me on that one?
Yeah. What were your initial thoughts?
Oh, cool. It was funny. Like I said, I read it all in one sitting on the plane, and so I had sort of sat down, and just from the cover art and from the little bit that I knew going in, I was expecting a certain amount of like tongue-in-cheek kind of going into it, and it did, but it actually, I was surprised that it as it went on, it seemed to sort of, it took that pulp concept and then it kept rolling in other sort of neat, like like he was mentioning, meta elements or kind of bigger picture sort of ideas to it, and I was really impressed with the ambition on some of that. What's tough is you've got these really big archetypal sort of concepts about war or about media that are sort of playing out, and you've got this ludicrous character marching through the middle of it with this gorilla with six shooting guns, and balancing those elements, those ingredients, and making you care enough about the content, it's sort of the deeper elements of it, while juggling sort of the action pulpy bits. I felt like it worked for me overall. Like, I really did. At first, I was sort of like, I don't know if this is just going to be this surface level kind of pulp thing. But the further it went on, I felt like it worked. The vast majority of it worked for me, and I was pleased with how it paid off. It did have this sort of structure where there were bigger picture ideas, and I can tell that the world building is obviously a lot broader than the plot that sort of drives the miniseries. And so it's interesting. It was like, I want to see more of that sort of place, but I don't know if necessarily a sequel. It's I guess that's the sign of a good world, that you want to dive into more of it. Although narratively speaking, it kind of ties up at the end all the major character bits. So I don't know if it could actually sustain a sequel. But in terms of the broader ideas that they were sort of approaching, I feel like it had some meat on the bone. It was good.
Yeah, cool. And what about you, Sam?
So I kind of mixed feelings. So first of all, I was a history major, so I really appreciated, one thing I really, really appreciated was the kind of using that primary source of that character and how he tied what looked like to be pages from old Harper's magazines or the Atlantic into the book, and you're able to see that character in its initial form, Six Gun Gorilla. So I really liked that. That was fun for me. Kind of like another book I read recently, Wake. I thought that it was really highly conceptual, with the meta here, and then Wake, kind of had that twist of an ending. But in both cases, it lost me a bit. I thought that for me, the narration and the story itself, I kind of got lost, and maybe that's just, I need to go back and read it. Maybe I'm just dumb as a brick, but I thought that the conceptual bit of it made the narrations suffer a bit for me, or the overall story.
Yeah, that's something I wanted to delve into a little bit. Was sort of like the meta nature of the story, which is something I really appreciate, just because it's, I don't know, I just enjoy stories like that, but I understand that not everybody does. I know that a lot of people feel when you sort of delve into sort of like a meta commentary on either culture or on authorship or just story, in this case, like with Six Gun Gorilla, that it can sort of take you out, and some people feel that it's not as engrossing as a critique I've heard of that approach in books like, say, for example, Morrison's Ant-Man or Animal Man, where like he as an author steps right into the story and has like an actual conversation with the character that he's writing. And there's a little bit of that in here. It was ultimately a critique and sort of commentary on the nature of sort of, I guess, on multiple levels. One of stories themselves and what that means in the context of a Western, and like what Western stories sort of mean. In Spurrier's little video that he did to hype the book, he said something that like Westerns are inherently sort of about the transitioning from the old into the new, where you have a character that sort of is from the old world, sort of fighting to bring in the new, and you see that theme coming up again and again in Six Gun Gorilla, to the point where maybe some people might think it would detract from the story, but I loved it. I think when you create an artifact like this, you create a comic story that has those elements in it, it becomes like a little bit more of just a story. Like it's almost sort of like I don't even know what the word would be, but both critique and story at the same time, I guess. Something a little bit more, which makes it as a whole, I think, like a bit more stronger and like sort of merits it a little bit more of like a careful eye and maybe even like a rereading. So I really appreciated that. It's like the nature of story and stories having an end. His critique on what I perceive to be at least like a critique on reality television and things being about spectacle as opposed to an actual narrative. So I don't know. And like, why do you think, Sam, that took you out of the story? Why didn't you enjoy that part?
Well, I don't know if it maybe took me out of the story is the right way to put it, but I did enjoy it. I did enjoy it. It was an interesting read. I just some of the meta bit towards the end, I didn't feel was pulled off particularly well. I don't want to be too harsh here because I did enjoy it, but I think that it wasn't what he was the point or the critique as you might call it or whatever you want to call it. He was trying to deliver the meta nature of it wasn't for me clear. I wasn't necessarily sure what he was trying to say at some point. And that also had some effect on the narration in terms of like what just happened. I'm confused. What just happened? If he's trying to say something, what is he trying to say? So, and it does merit a reread. You're right. I think I would get a lot more out of it a second time around.
And Jim, you brought up a really interesting point about like the world building, and that you sort of wanted to see a little bit more of that world, and you might not be...
one of the things that when you're doing this kind of a story, and if you've got, I don't know if they had a locked page count or not, in terms of the number of issues, you really got to kind of pick your battles, and that's the thing is that the good thing is that they had a broad enough concept that they could have delved more into the page count, but they were really focused on I forget Blue, whatever the number he was, his storyline and what he was doing. And so I feel like they made the right choice narratively speaking. You're going to stick with your main character. You're going to stick with that overarching plot line. But the good thing was there was enough sort of other stuff going on that even if they had a larger page count and they could have picked up on it, they could have delved into other things like his ex-girlfriend. She gets a really kind of basic story, and she doesn't really have much happen to her. And I feel like you were talking about the reality television angle, which I feel is very distinctive, and that you could have broadened her story or things like that if you had the page count. But if you don't, you got to sort of play tight to the core of it, and that's what he did. So
yeah, I wonder how much of it changed because it looked like, because I mean, when they kind of introduced the girlfriend, they introduced her with that kind of that cliffhanger page, or you go from that page and it moves on and you don't see her until halfway through again. I think it's the beginning of the third issue, and when you see her again, it's she's kind of been reduced to as something that they can use for more information as the main bad guys, if you will. And I kind of felt like maybe they had an idea and they decided not to go with it because they gave it a little bit of importance and it changed. So it'd be kind of curious.
That can be part of the whole monthly production of a comic as well. Yeah. Sometimes you as much as you have a story outline and you want to follow it, as you're actually scripting, you can have happy accidents, good and bad, that sort of things work or things don't work as well as you had conceptualized. And so that can be one of the most difficult things to sort of explain to people. You've got this relentless schedule. Unless you have the lucky ability to finish the whole thing scripting-wise and then look back at it, you're usually releasing number 1 while you're finishing number 4 or whatever it's going to be. And so you got to play with whatever's in print now, for the most part. And so it can be this weird sort of thing where sometimes you go, yeah, if I would have had more time, I would have done it differently. But these are the tools that I've given myself to work with, and you got to sort of play with what's there,
Are there tricks that you use, doing multiple monthlies that you have to sort of walk that line?
I'm pretty structured. Like I tend to, people ask me, well, how do you write a script fast or whatever? That most of the heavy lifting is the story breakdown, is that outline. And with work for hire in particular, I tend to get a lot tighter and a lot more careful because you need to have that approval process in place. And so in this case, it's a creator-owned book. As far as I know, it's Spurrier's creator-owned. So you've got more of the looseness to be able to go, okay, here's the core concept. And the approval process, I assume, is a lot less stringent when it's your own thing. And so you can kind of, I don't know, the muses can sort of take you in a little bit different directions. Like I just had that happen over the weekend. I was writing Wayward #5, and in the original outline, the ending of the first story arc is one thing, and then I realized midway through the issue that we should take it a little bit in a different direction. And so I emailed Steve, the artist, and said, okay, we're going to do this. And he was like, oh, that's cool. That's even more kind of brutal to the characters. And I said, great, let's make it harder for them, you know. So, but that's the kind of thing where I wouldn't necessarily be able to do that as easily with a work for hire project. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I tend to do a lot of heavy structuring out, and then I do an actual page pacing breakdown, so I know how long each scene is going to be for the most part before I actually sit down and script. So I tend to be a pretty formalist, and that's not a good or bad thing. It's just my method, you know. And I've worked with other people who are literally like, "Here's the general idea, page 1," and then they just sort of tear into it, and they tend to do a lot of rewrite and re-edit. Whereas I think it's also, if I'm not trying to get too cerebral, but I think it's part of my animation background. So when you shoot a live-action movie, you shoot like 3-4 times as much footage as you need, and then you cut it all together. And in animation, you can't animate double the time and then cut it back. So you tend to pre-cut. You do storyboards, and you literally pre-cut the whole film into storyboard sequences. And then you put a temp track with the voices, and it's like you're watching the movie without the animation. And then they cut the film right pretty much to the minute before they go into the animation of the thing. And so I think because that's my background, that's kind of how I think about the comics. I get hyper formalized and structured and cut it all together before I start scripting.
Interesting. So do you spend a lot more time on like the beginning part of a story before you actually start scripting than the actual story itself?
Yeah, I spend a disproportionate amount of time building, and that's why even though I'm writing 6 books, I'm really scripting 6 books. I'm only building usually 1, maximum 2 at a time, but when I build them, I'm building 5-6 issues at a time. And so by the time I get to the scripting phase, it's like I've played those sequences out in my head so many times, I'm just doing dialogue and panel descriptions. So I usually script a comic in about, 2 to 3 days.
That's not too long at all.
No, but I've already done, I think, most of the storytelling heavy lifting. And if I'm under the gun, I could do it faster, but I try not to. So.
Oh, I see. Well, so how long did you put into Wayward in the building phase?
So Steve and I were talking about doing a book together for a while, but we didn't really solidify it until, say, mid to late September last year. And then we had the pitch, which was, I'd say, about 75% of the story figured out by the time New York Comic-Con came around, because I took that pitch to New York and showed it to a few different publishers. So that would have been about anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks of back and forth with character sketches and with development. But then there were some story things that we kept vague until we had sort of the deal in place with Image, and then we really locked a bunch of it down. One of the characters got cut out of the first arc. We lengthened the story because it was one of the pitches that we had. It was only 4 issues for the first arc, and then we made it 5. I cut one of the characters out so we had more room to do other things, and that character will be showing up in the second arc instead. So stuff like so. We still made changes, but the majority of the heavy lifting had already been done.
I see. Intriguing. Now, how do you go about with, like, for example, in Six Gun Gorilla, there are sorts of things like seated that you can see, and maybe I just picked up on these because I've read this before and then reread it again for this. Like themes that get seated, and just certain like story aspects that'll be there that then sort of replay themselves out over time, and that's something that I really appreciate about this book and about a lot of size work in general. And it takes a lot of sort of careful planning and stuff. I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about like your process for that stuff, like when you're building and then your script writing, or like I guess building, outlining, script writing. Like at what point do you like start seeding things in a particular issue that then sort of like build themselves over time? You know what I mean?
It sort of varies depending on the project. I think you want to have thematic sort of broad ideas. And that, so that sort of drives the core concept. And so with almost every book I do, I've got, okay, what is the book about? And I've got like a a log line for myself that sort of, if I ever lose my way, I can look at that and go, does this reinforce that, or am I just is this masturbatory? Am I just doing random things at this point? Because you get yourself sort of wound in circles trying to make something cool or something interesting, and you're like, does this even tell any of the story that I was trying to tell? And sometimes you even question that original theme. You're like, is this story really about that anymore? Mm-hmm. And that's valid too, you know what I mean? Until it's printed, until it's out there in the public, you still can make those changes and make those alterations and tie those strings together in unexpected ways. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there should be some of those happy accidents and those little moments where you go, holy crap, this actually is deeper, or this has more stuff going on than even I'd originally anticipated. And now, or someone reads it that you trust, and they point out something that seems so blindingly obvious, but you couldn't see it because you were too close to it. Mm-hmm. There was someone who read Wayward #2, and they read the script and they were like, "Oh, I love how this contrasts against that." And I went, "Yeah, me too. That was a whew, good thing we put that in there." And then all of a sudden, I went to my third and fourth script and go, really made that much more a part of the thing. So sometimes this stuff happens whether you want it to or not, and other times I think it's just a matter of it is part of the building process. I don't think there's any sort of one, I've literally had times where I've had to go in and dialogue something to make a connection point or to make sure something makes sense. And you try not to do that. I mean, you want it to flow right from the start. But you got to sort of play with what you got. And obviously it's a hell of a lot faster to change some dialogue than it is to be like, hey, can we redraw this whole sequence? Because I had a great idea. But that being said, yeah, like Wayward #4 is 24 pages, and we added 2 extra pages because I was like, I need more room for this. I want this thing to happen, and I'm trying to squeeze it into 22 pages, and it doesn't work. And the great thing with Image, they're just like, they don't care. They'll just drop 2 house ads out of the back. So,
That's great. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. And then the last issue of the arc is 21 pages because I was like, yeah, we're done. I did what we needed. We're good.
That's cool. I wanted to ask Jim, what did you think of Jeff Stokely's artwork in this book?
I think it's fun. It definitely has an animated quality to it. It's fun stuff. I feel like there's a lot of neat, expressive stuff going on. I always feel bad when I'm not crediting someone. I'm not sure who the colorist was, but the colorist did a good job of making sure that you knew where we were because you have these different locations, and they did a relatively good job. That kind of fine line artwork that Stokely's doing, there were times when it got a little finicky, like I couldn't, there was a story point where I'd have to look over a page more carefully to see what they were picking up on, but most of the time it really worked, and the action delivers, and it's all kind of there on the page, which is nice. I didn't feel like Cy was having to over-explain things because the art didn't do it or whatever. There's definitely a nice, quality to it, and you get enough of that pulpiness. It reminded me a little bit of, yep, there it goes, right out of my head. Rob Guillory's stuff on Chew. Like it had a bit of that. It's not it wasn't as taken as far as some of the crazy stuff that Rob does, but it had a bit of that kind of Chew quality to it, which I like, and it definitely has a bit of that animation flow going, which is very cool.
Yeah. I kind of thought it also looked a little bit like your collaborator, Felipe Andrade.
It definitely had a bit of that Felipe feel to it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. They're similar. The colorist is Andre May, by the way. Letters by Steve Wands, cover by Ramon Perez.
Yeah, and it's funny, I'm friends with Ramon. I thought he did a great job on the covers. I generally like it if the interior artists are doing the cover, you know what I mean? And it was like, I love Ramon's stuff, so I was a little bit worried. I'm like, I know Ramon didn't do the interior. I hope it's good, because Ramon's such a killer artist, But it worked.
Killer. It was Stokely. He's got almost like a cartoonist edge to him, he's very expressive in terms of his the character's features, but at the same time he's damn good with character design. The way that he drew that gorilla man is so good. Just this 500-pound like hulking thing that still, you know, like had these sort of like clever little quick looks here and there, and you know, just like felt almost like a Clint Eastwood in a gorilla's body. You know, it was really well done, and the world building elements too, like just the way that he drew some of those things, like the giant turtles, like those were incredible. That was such an awesome idea, and I wonder like to what extent that was like Cy's idea versus Stokely's. You know, like how much influence Stokely actually had on like that world building and design aspect of things. And the colors were great. You know, I think that's.
Yeah, the colors go a long way for maintaining that Western feel.
Yeah.
Well, especially you know nowadays with the modern production on comics, the colorist is such a crucial part of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, every comic should have the colorist's credit on the front because the coloring adds so much to the book. It adds so much atmosphere. It adds so much volume. It directs your eye, and it helps you, you know, where you're supposed to be looking on the page, where the emphasis is, where the emotion is. Colorists do so much nowadays on the comic page. When you look at the original art on a lot of these books and you look at the final version, I mean, it's staggering in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is.
Now,
Why? Go ahead, Dave. No, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to ask, what did you guys think of the dialogue?
I thought the dialogue was I mean, that was one of the stronger parts of the story. I think he has a way of making it seem fluid, and it feels natural. It feels real. Nothing feels forced. But it's not as Mamet. You know, it doesn't have that David Mamet quality like some people that really hammer down dialogue with a lot of ums and back and forths. You know, it just felt. It felt unique to the story, and each character kind of had their own little voice. Even the accents, phonetically spelling out some of the accents didn't bother me. Just sometimes that bothers me. Sometimes like anytime you see Gambit written in an X-Men comic, it's like it's awful most of the time.
No share.
We talked with James Asmus about this because he's from Louisiana, so he had to write the Gambit story, and he wrote it pretty well, and everyone Gambit fans got mad at him because you didn't write Mon Chéri anytime. Like, okay, all right, guys.
Do you know what's funny though is that it's like I love that you use the term mammoth, by the way, like it's like a descriptor. I love that. Like, man, someday when I'm really crusting on, I want something to get like it was very zub. I don't know. It had kind of a zub to it. I think that if you're so synonymous with a particular thing. Man, they really Claremonted this sucker. It was like totally.
I think we used that term last week, actually. So.
Oh, did that come up last week? Was that a thing?
It did.
Well, true. I mean, dude, but Mamet had like such a profound impact, at least on a lot of.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. I mean, that's there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, and I enjoy it. In certain areas, like Bendis's X-Men wouldn't be Bendis's X-Men if you didn't have. You know, Iceman bickering with Beast all the time, and it's perfect for that. But
no, it's funny that and when someone says that it's very Bendis, you know what that means. Actually, that's kind of what's funny about it is that it has an iconic kind of quality to it, where you're just like, yeah, this sort of rapid fire, tiny back and forth, you know, balloons and whatnot.
Yeah, the wit that you have in a conversation with friends, and that sort of rapport you have, you can't really duplicate it. But would it work for a story like this? I mean, that's hard to say. I mean, I don't think you can get that kind of high concept, roll with the punches. Here's a 600-pound gorilla with a couple 6-shooters. You know, I don't think it would work. It's just this works for the story, and especially for the setting and the world that he's building.
Yeah, I was just so impressed by like that accent that a lot of the characters use. You know, it was just so well done. And like, I wonder how much like sort of research and time and effort it goes into, you know, like structuring someone's voice like that in a comic.
I love doing character voices, and I think, you know, on my website I've got a lot of tutorials about writing and stuff, and I talk about if a character says a line and another character, if two characters are imparting information, neither of them should say it the exact same way. That you should be able to give some sense of personality through almost any piece of dialogue. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that you have to like load it up or make it just overwrought with weird tics or strange stuff, but by the same token, one of the things I do is after I finish writing a script, I always read it out loud. My poor wife, she walks by my little office, whatever, the door's closed, and I'm like hooting and hollering and making weird voices and like trying to get, because you want it to flow. You want it to feel like these words are coming out of someone's mouth.
Yep.
And one of those unfortunate cliches of old comics is they read okay on the page, and then if you read it out loud, you're like, this is the hokiest, most brutal dialogue. It doesn't feel like any human being would ever speak this way. And we're much more discerning now about that kind of stuff, and so I want the dialogue that I write to feel like it's got a place, and especially if it's a specific character. So if I'm writing Samurai Jack, Jack's got a cadence. He's got a way that he speaks, and Aku and all the other characters have a cadence, and I'm trying to inhabit those characters, and the fans of that property, they care a great deal about it feeling like and sounding like it's coming out right. And so I want to make sure that I do that. And sometimes it's absolutely ludicrous. Like I wrote a Legends of the Dark Knight story, and so I had a Harley Quinn thing, which was the greatest. I love that character, and I would love to write her anytime. And writing that voice, getting that, Harley Quinn's very, very distinctive, and it's more than just saying Mr. J and Puddin' or whatever. It's like, it's all the ways, and it's the confidence that she has, and this sassiness that she imbues every sentence with. So when she's talking and she's having this confrontation with Batman, how do you have that come through? Not just the catchphrases. Wolverine is more than just bub, and all that stuff. Like, how do you make all the lines of dialogue feel like they're coming out of that character, and that they sound right, and that they feel right, and that people could imagine them saying it?
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you go about
getting them out of that? That's the kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But then there's a difference. Then there's putting the voice of a character who already kind of has like an established voice, but then there's actually coming up with a voice for a brand new character that you created.
Right.
And how do you go about doing something like that? When in SKULLKICKERS, each of those characters has their own sort of flavor.
I don't know. It's weird. Like coming up with the character stuff's a bit weird because you kind of. That's tougher for sure. It's almost like you're doing internal like casting, like you're sort of in your mind. You're like, this character sounds a bit like that, or they have this actor's kind of approach, or you sort of think about. Like in some cases, I'll literally write dialogue that they'll never say when I'm starting. I'll just write a sequence of them talking to someone, and so that way I can figure out the kinds of words they would use or the ways that they would. How direct are they? How indirect are they? How confident are they? What sort of personality traits are we trying to bring out in that dialogue? Is this person going to do everything in their power to avoid telling you the truth? Then that's got to come through in the way that they sort of dance around their answers to everything, And sometimes even what you think is coming through doesn't always come through the way you expect. There's a line in the new issue of Wayward that came out today, and one of the characters is lying, and I thought that was relatively clear, and in a couple of the reviews people were like, oh, this is this happening, and I was like, really? You thought they were saying the truth? That's very weird to me, so you've got to, sometimes you can sort of overthink it, you just got to kind of,
Intriguing.
It's interesting. So,
all right. Well, we've been here for just about an hour, I suppose. You guys have any last thoughts about the book? Things that you found particularly impressive or off-putting or anything like that?
Sam, why don't you go? You haven't been speaking for a while.
Oh, I think I already said how I feel about it. It's good. I maybe merit another read for me. Maybe I'd get a little more out of it, but I think I've kind of voiced how I feel about it.
Okay.
Got you, Joe?
I think it's really neat. It's funny because a lot of publishers have a very distinctive sort of flair. Like to me, I think of this book as like, not this book, Six Gun Gorilla, but if I look at a book, I sort of go, oh, that's a Vertigo book, or that's an Oni book, or that very much feels like a Dark Horse book. And it's been Boom has been sort of figuring out if they are a particular thing, and it's been interesting sort of taking in some of their books and kind of going, what is a Boom book? And I don't know that there is a distinctive Boom feel. I think Boom wants to be like Image, that they want to have the broadest sort of net possible. And that's something definitely worth aspiring to. And so I don't know that I would say that I expected this as like, man, this is really a distinctively Boom. It's a solid book and it's fun, and it definitely has its own feel. Like it doesn't feel like a house style. It doesn't feel like they're trying to fit themselves into some other person's, storytelling, which is cool.
Great. And Joe, how about you?
Like I said, I was expecting a Western, and I got this meta tale about myth and what it means to people. It was it was fun. It was fun to digest and sit and think about after it was all said and done. And you have awesome visuals about a giant gorilla shooting the shit out of things, and when you get into I read comics for escapism, and what is better than that? Not much.
I think that's one of the most exciting things about comics right now, is that the kind of stories that you would have a horrific time pitching in any other medium, you're sort of like, dude, comics. Of course we can do this. And they're like, yeah, okay.
Hell yes. There's an interesting point. I don't know if you guys had this in like your digital version for the trades or whatever way you were writing, but in the version that I had like a little sort of afterward, an author's note after the story, and he mentioned that he was going back and forth about the title. He was worried that people who would appreciate such a kind of like meta take wouldn't pick up a book called Six Gun Gorilla, but then at the same time there is like sneaking this kind of story into the minds of people who would buy a book called Six Gun Gorilla. And they ultimately decided to go with Six Gun Gorilla, of course. But I thought that was a clever little thing, and that ties into what you were saying, Joe, with picking up this book and getting something completely different than what you were expecting. And it's clever. It shows the power of titles too, But just for my last word, I love the book. As I said, it was my choice. Love Cy Spurrier. I'm excited to see the other work that he's going to be putting out.
Does he have other stuff announced right now?
Yeah, well, he just finished. He was writing Crossed, Wish You Were Here, which I just started reading, and it is incredible. Crossed is kind of a love it or hate it book. I'm in the love it camp, not just because it's murder porn. It's like such an utterly human book, and I think Garth Ennis and Cy Spurrier did the best ever on that book. He's doing X-Force for Marvel, and that's sort of a really interesting way of using mutants in this, and like sort of the theme of surveillance and sort of like the post-Snowden world that we're living to, with like mutants getting into that. And that's interesting. He is doing like another comic for Avatar. It's like their weekly webcomic called Disenchanted, which is sort of about where fairy tales go to die, essentially. And it's like when people stop believing it and they live in this ghetto. And it's dark, but really, really well done. And other than that, I don't know if he does have books. I wouldn't be surprised if he had another Marvel book coming in this next round of whatever's coming from them. And
that's a pretty good run of stuff, though. That's all kinds of different variety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in the back matter for Six Gun Gorilla, he said that he and Jeff Stokely are going to be working together again. So hopefully we'll see that soon. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jim, once again, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time, man. It was a damn pleasure to talk with you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys. I appreciate the support and letting me yammer about a bunch of different creative stuff. So it's very cool. And it's nice to talk about. I love talking shop. It's funny because one of the reasons why you kind of work in isolation on a lot of this stuff. So I think during convention season, one of the things a lot of us love when we're on the road is just meeting up and talking shop, or just getting a sense of, hey, are you reading stuff? What's up? What do you like? And just feeding on that kind of enthusiasm, because sometimes the creative process on comics can be very kind of singular,
Yep, absolutely. Well, dude, we loved having you, man. We'd love to have you again later on down the road.
Thanks.
Yeah. Wayward 2 on shelves right now.
That's right.
With
Pick it
all-
up.
It's
with all
Samurai
your other
Jack.
stuff too, right?
What's that?
And
With all
Samurai
your other
Jack.
books.
Yeah, Samurai Jack 12's on the stands today, and so's Pathfinder City of Secrets #5, all today. It's
Cool.
like a hat trick of Zub.
Nice.
And
when,
then,
Clearly Canadian reference.
that's right. Oh.
hockey.
That's right.
When does the next issue of Skullkickers hit the stands?
Skullkickers, our final story arc starts next year. We haven't solicited it yet. Probably February, maybe March. And we'll be running 5 ludicrous issues to wrap everything up in the most apocalyptically action-packed way possible.
Nice. That's
Awesome.
exciting. Hell yeah. All right. Well, gentlemen, it was a pleasure as always. Jim, thank you once again. And
My pleasure.
next week, just so you all know, we're going to be reading Nowhere Men by Eric Stevenson, the esteemed head of Image Comics, and I'm blanking on his name, the artist.
Nate Bellegarde and Jordi Belair.
Yeah, dude, that team is just killer.
Great team.
Yep. And we're going to have Grace Randolph, writer extraordinaire and frequent contributor to Bleeding Pool, just like ourselves. I'm super stoked to have her on. So it'll be a damn good time. So
So join us.
We'll see you next time. Take care, guys.
Take care.